The morning my mother asked me not to come to Christmas, I was standing in a courthouse bathroom staring at my reflection under fluorescent lights that made everyone look tired and guilty. I remember thinking how fitting it was. That room had seen confessions breakdowns and people realizing too late that the story they told themselves was wrong. My phone buzzed in my coat pocket. I already knew who it was before I looked. And our family urgency only traveled one direction, downhill, toward me. "Call me when you can," the text said. No heart emoji, no softening words, just command disguised as concern. I finished washing my hands, dried them carefully, and checked my watch. It was 9:15 in the morning. I had just finished arguing a motion that would decide whether a woman 10 years older than me would lose her house after her husband died. I won that argument. Barely. The judge gave me a nod that said, "You earned it." That nod mattered to me more than praise ever had. I stepped out into the hallway, heels echoing against marble that had outlived every ego that ever walked across it. I leaned against a window overlooking the parking lot and called my mother back. "What's wrong?" I asked, skipping pleasantries. She exhaled slowly, the way she always did when she wanted to sound reasonable. "Nothing is wrong, Claire. Don't start like that. My name is Claire Bennett. I am 32 years old. I'm a probate attorney in a mid-sized city outside Boston. I specialize in estates, wills, trusts, and the quiet wars families fight when someone dies and leaves behind more than memories. I deal in truth documents, ink, signatures, finality." "Then why do you need to talk to me right now?" I asked. There was a pause. I could picture her at the kitchen table in my childhood home, one hand around her coffee mug, the other smoothing an invisible wrinkle in the tablecloth. She always did that when she was nervous. "It's about Christmas," she said. I closed my eyes. "Here it comes. You know your brother and Emily are coming this year," she continued. "And your sister has, well, she has news." "Engaged, I guessed." "Yes," my mother said quickly, relief flooding her voice as if she were glad I had said it first. "Daniel proposed last weekend. We're very happy for her." "I'm happy for her too," I said. And I meant it. My sister Lauren had always wanted a wedding more than a marriage. The ring was the real prize. "That's why we need to be careful," my mother said. "This Christmas is important." I shifted my weight, staring down at my reflection in the glass. My hair was pulled back in a low bun. No makeup except concealer under my eyes. I looked like what I was. A woman who worked too much and didn't apologize for it anymore. Careful how I asked. Another pause, longer this time. "Claire," she said gently, "your sister is under a lot of pressure. Daniel's family is very traditional. They care about appearances." There it was, the word that had ruled our household since childhood. Appearances. "And what does that have to do with me?" I asked. "Well," my mother said, lowering her voice as if someone might overhear her through the phone, "you have a way of making people uncomfortable without meaning to." I laughed once, short, sharp by existing. "Don't be dramatic," she said. "You're intense. You always talk about work. You ask questions that feel like interrogations. And, well, you don't exactly fit the picture." "What picture?" I asked, though I already knew. "The picture of a happy, settled family," she said. "Daniel's parents are old-fashioned. They believe a woman's life should look a certain way by her early 30s. I waited. I let her say it. "You're not married," she continued. "You don't have children. You live alone. And your job—" She hesitated. "Your job is a little confusing to explain." Confusing. I thought of the courtroom I had just walked out of, the woman who hugged me in the hallway because I had saved her home. The boxes of files in my office labeled with names of people who trusted me with the last decisions of their lives. Confusing to who I asked. "To people who don't understand law," my mother said quickly. "They might think you're struggling." There it was, the word she avoided but meant. "So what are you saying?" I asked. She inhaled. "I think it might be best if you skip Christmas this year." The sentence landed softly, too softly, like it had been rehearsed. "I'm sorry," I said. "Just this once," she rushed on. "We can do something after the holidays, just us. But this Christmas needs to be smooth." Smooth. I pictured my sister in a white dress, my mother crying happy tears, my father shaking hands proudly. And I pictured myself sitting at the end of the table being quietly evaluated. "You want me to stay away?" I said. "It's not like that," she insisted. "It's temporary. It's protective." Protective of who, I asked. Silence. Then faintly I heard my sister's voice in the background. "Did she say yes yet?" Something inside me went cold. Not anger. Anger burns. This was something quieter, like a door closing. "I'll think about it," I said. "Claire," my mother said, relief and warning tangled together. "Please don't make this difficult." I ended the call without answering. I stood there for a long moment, phone pressed to my ear, listening to the deadline. Then I slid it into my pocket and went back inside. I didn't cry, I didn't scream, I didn't call anyone to complain. I went back to my office. At 10:30, my assistant knocked on my door and handed me a file. New intake, she said. Family dispute. The decedent left a handwritten amendment to the will. The siblings are contesting. I opened the folder. The last name on the file made my stomach drop. Hollander. The same last name as my sister's fiancé. I flipped to the summary. The decedent was Margaret Hollander. Age 78. Wealthy. Real estate. Investments. A complicated estate. And the attorney of record listed at the bottom of the page was Daniel Hollander, my sister's future husband. I stared at the file, pulse steady, mind suddenly very clear. I had just been uninvited from Christmas because I didn't fit the picture. And now sitting on my desk was a case that could quietly, legally, irrevocably rewrite the entire frame. I closed the folder. For the first time that day, I smiled. And somewhere deep inside, a question began to form. What happens when this person you erase turns out to be the one holding the pen? By noon, the file on my desk no longer felt like coincidence. It felt like a fuse. I locked my office door and read every page slowly, the way you read a medical report when the diagnosis might change everything. Margaret Hollander had died 3 weeks earlier. Natural causes, no drama, no suspicious timing. The kind of death families thought would be simple until it wasn't. Her original will left the bulk of her estate to her 2 sons. Daniel, my sister's fiancé, and his older brother Richard. Standard. Predictable. But attached to the file was a handwritten codicil dated 8 months before her death. Signed. Witnessed. Valid on its face. The amendment redistributed a significant portion of the estate to a trust, not for her sons, for an unnamed beneficiary referenced only as the party who ensured my wishes were honored when I no longer had a voice. That kind of language never appears by accident. Someone had intervened, quietly, legally, and the brothers were now fighting over what they believed was rightfully theirs. I leaned back in my chair and stared at the ceiling. The irony was sharp enough to taste. My sister was about to marry into a family tearing itself apart over inheritance while believing I was the unstable one who needed to be hidden. At 1 o'clock, I received an email from Daniel. Subject line: probate matter consultation. Professional. Neutral. He didn't know I had the file yet, or maybe he assumed I would never be assigned to it. Claire, the email began, I understand you've been brought in on the Hollander estate dispute. Given the family connection, I want to ensure we maintain appropriate boundaries. Please advise whether you believe a conflict exists. I smiled. There it was, the preemptive defense. He was already managing optics, protecting the image. I typed my response carefully. Daniel, I see no conflict at this time. The beneficiary is unnamed, and I have no personal interest in the estate. I am prepared to proceed professionally unless the court advises otherwise. I hit send. At 2:30, my sister called. I didn't answer. She left a voicemail instead. Her voice was breathless, bright, rehearsed. Hey, Claire, Mom said you sounded weird earlier. Are you okay? We really want Christmas to be perfect this year. Don't overthink it. Love you. Love you. I deleted the message. That evening, I went home to my apartment. It was quiet, clean, unapologetically mine. I poured a glass of wine and opened my laptop, pulling public records, cross-referencing names, dates, addresses. Margaret Hollander had lived alone for the last decade. Her husband died years earlier. According to medical records attached to the probate file, her cognitive decline began subtly. Early dementia, nothing dramatic, just enough to make her vulnerable to influence. But the codicil wasn't sloppy. It wasn't emotional. It was precise. Written with clarity. Whoever helped her draft it knew what they were doing. I scrolled through caregiver records, and then I saw the name. Elena Brooks, court-appointed patient advocate, temporary, hired through a private agency. My breath slowed. Elena Brooks had been one of my clients 2 years earlier. Wrongful termination case. She had lost her job after reporting elder financial abuse at a different facility. She was meticulous, ethical, quietly furious at systems that protected power over people. I still had her number. I stared at my phone for a long time before dialing. She answered on the 3rd ring. Claire Bennett, she said, recognition immediate. I wondered when you'd call. So she knew. You're involved with the Hollander estate, I said. Yes, she replied calmly. And I assume your family is too. I closed my eyes. They're fighting the codicil, I said, claiming undue influence. Elena laughed softly, not amused, bitter. Of course they are. Tell me what you can, I said. There was a pause. Then, off the record. Always, I said. Elena exhaled. Margaret knew her sons were preparing to manage her out of her own life. She overheard conversations, emails, discussions about selling the house before she was gone. She was terrified. And Daniel, I asked. He was the worst, Elena said. Polite, charming, always offering help while documenting every asset. He spoke about her like she was already a ledger entry. I thought of my sister, her smile, her obsession with security, her belief that love was transactional. Margaret asked me for help, Elena continued, not to punish them, to protect herself. She wanted to redirect her estate to someone who would actually honor her values. Who, I asked. Elena paused. Me, she said, indirectly. Through a trust that funds elder advocacy. But Daniel and Richard don't know that yet. They think the beneficiary is unknown. I let that sink in. You're prepared to defend it, I asked. Yes, Elena said. I documented everything. Conversations, witness statements, medical evaluations. They won't win. Good. I ended the call and sat in silence, the weight of everything settling into place. The next morning, my mother called again. This time I answered. Claire, she said, relieved. Thank God. We were worried. I'm fine, I said. We need to finalize seating for Christmas Eve, she continued. Daniel's parents are very specific. I won't be there, I said calmly. A pause. Then I thought you were thinking about it. I have, I said. I've decided. Her tone shifted, slightly irritated now. You're being dramatic. No, I replied. I'm being observant. What does that mean? It means I see where I'm wanted and where I'm not, I said. And I'm choosing accordingly. She sighed. You're punishing us. No, I said. I'm protecting myself. That night I received a formal notice. The Hollander brothers were filing a motion to remove me from the case due to familial bias. Daniel had changed his mind. I read the motion carefully. It was aggressive, framed me as emotionally compromised, suggested I might act vindictively toward my future brother-in-law. He was scared. Good. I filed my response within the hour, cited statutes, case law, precedent. The court denied the motion the next morning. The judge's note was brief. Attorney Bennett is more than capable of maintaining professional distance. Motion denied. I printed it and slid it into the file. Christmas was 3 days away. My sister posted photos of dress fittings, venue walkthroughs, champagne glasses clinking with captions about new beginnings. She had no idea that the family she was marrying into was already unraveling, or that the sister she had erased was about to sit quietly in a courtroom and let the truth speak for itself. I didn't need to ruin Christmas. I just needed to let inheritance law do what it does best. Reward patience, punish greed, and remind people that the past has a way of showing up uninvited, even when you think you've curated the guest list. The court date was set for December 22nd, 2 days before Christmas. That alone told me everything I needed to know about how desperate Daniel had become. Probate courts hate the holidays. Judges want clean calendars and quiet dockets. You don't get an emergency hearing that close to Christmas unless someone is pushing hard and fast, hoping to intimidate rather than persuade. Daniel wasn't trying to win on law. He was trying to win on pressure. I arrived early that morning, dressed plainly, hair pulled back the way I always did when I wanted to disappear into competence. Daniel arrived 10 minutes late, flanked by his brother Richard and a senior partner from his firm. They wore confidence like cologne, too much of it. When Daniel saw me, his expression flickered, just for a second, surprise mixed with something sharper, resentment. Claire, he said, approaching me near the benches, I didn't expect you to handle this personally. I didn't expect you to contest a valid codicil, I replied. But here we are. Richard scoffed. Come on, everyone knows how this looks. How what looks, I asked. Daniel stepped in quickly. Let's not do this here. We're already doing it here, I said calmly, in front of a judge. He lowered his voice. You're making this personal. No, I said. You did when you assumed I would step aside. His jaw tightened. Inside the courtroom, Elena sat behind me. She gave a small nod. Steady, ready. The judge listened patiently as Daniel's attorney argued undue influence. He painted a picture of a vulnerable elderly woman manipulated by an opportunistic advocate. He suggested financial motivation, emotional coercion, isolation. When it was my turn, I stood slowly. Your Honor, I said this case is not about influence. It's about documentation. I handed over exhibits, medical evaluations, independent assessments, audio transcripts of Margaret's own words. She knew exactly what she was doing, I continued. And more importantly, she knew what her sons were doing. Daniel's face drained of color. One transcript caught the judge's attention. Margaret's voice, brittle but clear, describing Daniel's insistence on consolidating her accounts for her own good. The judge leaned back. "Mr. Hollander," she said, "were you aware your mother believed you were preparing to liquidate her assets before her death?" Daniel swallowed. She was confused. Confused enough to articulate a precise redistribution of her estate, the judge asked. Silence. The ruling was swift. Motion denied. Codicil upheld. The trust would stand. Outside the courtroom, Daniel cornered me near the elevators. "You enjoyed that," he said quietly. "No," I replied. "I respected it." "You humiliated my family." "No," I said. "Your family exposed itself." His voice dropped. "You don't understand the consequences of this." "I understand them perfectly," I said. "You're just not used to facing them." That afternoon, my sister called again. This time I answered. "What is going on?" Lauren demanded. "Daniel is furious. He says you're sabotaging his family." "I'm doing my job," I said. "You could have recused yourself," she snapped. "You did this on purpose." I leaned against my kitchen counter. "You asked me to disappear so you could preserve an image. This is what happens when images crack." "You're jealous," she said. "You always have been." I laughed softly. Jealous of what, Lauren? The engagement, the borrowed stability. "You think you're better than us," she accused. "I think I'm honest," I replied. "That's the difference." She hung up on me. That night, my mother showed up at my apartment unannounced. She stood in the doorway, coat still on, eyes scanning my space as if she were seeing it for the first time. "This is nice," she said. "It's home," I replied. She sat down slowly. "Daniel says you cost his family millions." "I upheld a woman's final wishes," I said. "If that costs him money, that's not my burden." She clasped her hands together. "Lauren is devastated." "I was asked not to come to Christmas," I said. "I'm familiar with devastation." Her lips trembled. "We were trying to protect her future." "At the cost of mine," I asked. She looked down. "I didn't raise you to be so cold," she whispered. "No," I said. "You raised me to survive." She left without apologizing. Christmas Eve arrived quietly. I spent it alone cooking a meal I liked, opening a book I'd been meaning to read. I didn't check social media. I didn't wait for messages that wouldn't come. At 10:45 that night, my phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Daniel never told me about the court case, or his mother, or the trust. I found out tonight. "Thank you for not lying to me." It was Emily, my brother's wife. I stared at the message, then typed back. "You deserve the truth." Christmas morning, another text came through. This one from Daniel. "You think you won. You have no idea what's coming." I set the phone down. Because I did know. People like Daniel don't retaliate with truth. They retaliate with stories. And stories, unlike legal documents, don't require proof. They just require an audience, which meant the real battle hadn't started yet. It was simply changing venues, from the courtroom to the family table. And this time, I wasn't planning to leave my seat empty. The story Daniel told at Christmas traveled faster than the truth ever does. By the morning of December 26th, I had heard 3 different versions of it, each one more dramatic than the last. In one, I was a bitter career woman who used the law to punish families for having what I didn't. In another, I had manipulated a confused old woman for personal gain. In the most creative version, I had deliberately targeted Daniel's family as a way to sabotage my sister's engagement. None of those stories mentioned Margaret Hollander's voice shaking as she described being pressured to simplify her life. None of them mentioned the trust for elder advocacy. None of them mentioned documents, dates, or signatures. They mentioned feelings, hurt, betrayal, shock. Those are easier to sell. My brother called that afternoon. His voice was cautious, like someone stepping into a room where glass might be broken. "Emily told me what happened," he said. "Daniel's side is intense." "I imagine," I replied. "She says he's spinning this like you attacked him personally." "I didn't," I said. "I defended a client." There was a pause. "Mom's upset." "That's not new," I said. He sighed. "Lauren's saying you're trying to ruin her wedding." I closed my eyes. I didn't attend her Christmas. I didn't attend her engagement party. I haven't spoken publicly about anything. If that ruins her wedding, then it wasn't stable to begin with. He didn't argue. That evening, I received an email from the senior partner at Daniel's firm. Polite, chilly, informing me that Daniel would be withdrawing from the Hollander matter due to personal strain and that his firm would be pursuing a separate civil inquiry into the trust's formation. They were fishing. I forwarded the email to Elena with a single line. "They're circling." She replied within minutes. "Let them. Everything is documented." That should have been the end of it. But families don't stop at court rulings. They escalate sideways. On December 27th, my mother invited me to lunch. Neutral territory, a diner halfway between our homes. I almost declined. But avoidance had already cost me enough years. She arrived early. I could tell by the way she sat stiffly, hands folded, eyes scanning the door. "You look tired," she said as I slid into the booth. "So do you," I replied. We ordered coffee. She didn't touch hers. "Lauren is very upset," she began. I waited. "She feels like you don't support her happiness. my mother continued. Daniel's parents are asking questions. There's talk. About the truth, I asked. She winced. About your motives. My motive was honoring a dying woman's wishes, I said. If that's controversial, we have a bigger problem. She thinks you enjoy being the moral authority, my mother said quietly. That you like making people feel small. I leaned back against the vinyl seat. That's projection. She frowned. What does that mean? It means Lauren is used to being centered, I said, and when she isn't, she calls it cruelty. My mother stared at her coffee. Daniel's family is influential, she said. They're talking to people, board members, donors. There it was. Reputation. You're worried about fallout, I said. I'm worried about you, she insisted. No, I said gently. You're worried about what people will think of us. She didn't deny it. I need you to do something, she said finally. I raised an eyebrow. I need you to make this go away, she said. Apologize, publicly if necessary. Say there was a misunderstanding, that emotions were high. I felt something in my chest settle into place, not anger, resolution. No, I said. Her head snapped up. Claire, I won't lie to make others comfortable, I continued. Not anymore. You're tearing the family apart, she whispered. No, I said. I'm stepping out of a role that was suffocating me. She stared at me, eyes glossy. You used to be easier. I smiled sadly. I used to be quieter. We paid separately. That night, Lauren posted a long message on social media, carefully worded, vague, about betrayal, about people who weaponize intelligence, about choosing peace over poison. The comments poured in, sympathy, support, indirect accusations. I said nothing. The next morning, my assistant knocked on my office door with a look I recognized. Something came in, she said. You'll want to see it. She handed me a certified envelope. Inside was a formal complaint filed with the state bar. Against me, alleging ethical misconduct, conflict of interest, abuse of professional discretion, filed by Daniel Hollander. I sat down slowly. This wasn't emotional retaliation. This was procedural, calculated. He wasn't trying to win in court anymore. He was trying to discredit me. I read the complaint twice, then a third time. It was thin, allegations without evidence, emotion masquerading as ethics. But bar complaints don't need to be strong to be disruptive. They just need to exist. I forwarded it to my malpractice attorney with a single line. He's escalating. The reply came quickly. Let him, this is clean. Still that night I didn't sleep. Not because I was afraid of losing my license, but because I realized something deeper. Daniel didn't care about the trust anymore. He cared about control. And control when threatened doesn't retreat. It attacks. The next move wouldn't be legal. It would be personal. And it would come from the one place I hadn't yet fortified. My family. As I lay awake staring at the ceiling, one thought crystallized. If Daniel wanted a story, he was going to tell it. Which meant I needed to be ready with the receipts. Because the only thing more dangerous than a convincing lie is a quiet truth with proof. And I had both. The question was no longer whether I would respond. It was when and how publicly. The bar complaint changed the temperature of everything. Up until that moment, the conflict had lived in familiar territory. Family tension, holiday resentment, the quiet cruelty of being excluded. I knew how to survive that. I had been doing it my entire life. You keep your head down. You do your work. You wait for the storm to pass. But a professional attack is different. It doesn't shout. It doesn't cry. It files paperwork and waits for you to bleed out slowly. I arrived at my office early the next morning before the cleaning crew finished. The building was quiet, the kind of quiet that amplifies your own thoughts. I made coffee I didn't drink and opened a legal pad. On the top page, I wrote one word: strategy. If Daniel was going to challenge my ethics, then ethics would be my shield and my weapon. By 9 o'clock, my malpractice attorney called. Her voice was calm, almost bored. She had handled worse. This complaint won't go anywhere, she said, but you need to treat it seriously. Document everything. Do not engage emotionally. And whatever you do, do not discuss this with your family. I laughed once. That ship sailed years ago. Then build a new harbor, she replied, because this is no longer about your sister's wedding or your mother's feelings. This is about your career. She was right. At 10:30, I received another message. This one from my father. We need to talk. No greeting, no warmth. I didn't respond. An hour later, my brother called. I let it ring out. Then he texted. Daniel says you filed something against him. Is that true? The audacity of it almost impressed me. Daniel had filed a bar complaint against me, and somehow the narrative was already twisting itself into me being the aggressor. I replied with one sentence. He filed a complaint with the state bar against me. Ask him why. There was no response. That afternoon, Elena came by my office. She closed the door behind her and sat down without asking. He's not going to stop, she said. I know, I replied. He called the agency, she continued. Tried to imply I manipulated Margaret for personal gain. They laughed him off, but still, he's burning bridges. I leaned back in my chair. Men like him don't believe in bridges. They believe in leverage. Elena nodded. So what's your plan? I didn't answer immediately. I walked to the window and looked out over the street below. People moving with purpose, unaware of the small wars being waged in conference rooms and inboxes. I'm going to let him talk, I said finally, and I'm going to listen. Why, she asked. Because people who lie aggressively always reveal more than they intend, I said, especially when they think no one is watching. She smiled slowly. You've changed. No, I said. I've stopped compensating. That evening, my mother showed up again. This time, I didn't invite her in. We stood in the hallway, coats on like strangers, meeting in a neutral zone. Lauren is distraught, she said immediately. Daniel says you're trying to destroy him. He's trying to destroy me, I replied. There's a difference. You don't have to respond this way, she insisted. You could just step back. Let someone else handle things. You mean step aside, I said. She didn't deny it. You always make things harder than they need to be, she said quietly. I looked at her, really looked at her, at the lines around her eyes that came from worry and habit, not malice. At the woman who had taught me to be polite before she taught me to be strong. I didn't make this hard, I said. I just stopped making it easy for everyone else. Her eyes filled with tears. You're tearing us apart. No, I said. I'm refusing to hold us together by being smaller. She left without another word. That night I received an email from a colleague, a judge I respected, informal, cautious. Just a heads up, it read. Daniel Hollander has been asking questions, making implications. Be careful. I stared at the screen. This was the part Daniel didn't understand. I had built my reputation quietly, over years, case by case, person by person. I didn't dominate rooms. I didn't posture. I showed up prepared, consistent, fair. People trusted me. Which meant when Daniel started whispering, those whispers didn't echo the way he expected. 2 days later, the bar acknowledged receipt of the complaint and requested preliminary documentation, routine, neutral. I complied within the hour, sent timelines, disclosures, emails, court transcripts, every step documented, every decision justified. And then I waited. While Daniel escalated, Lauren's social media posts grew sharper, more pointed, mentions of betrayal and ambition, friends commenting with encouragement, some tagging me. I blocked them all. Daniel, meanwhile, sent a mass email to extended family, framing himself as a victim of professional retaliation, suggesting I had lost perspective. My aunt called, then my cousin, then an old family friend. I answered none of them, because I had realized something crucial. As long as I was responding to the noise, I was playing defense, and I was done defending my existence. The opening came unexpectedly, a voicemail from Daniel's senior partner. Claire, he said, voice tight. I wanted to give you a courtesy call. Daniel's behavior has raised concerns internally. If you have any information relevant to his conduct, now would be the time to share it. I closed my eyes. There it was. Not vengeance. Consequences. I do, I said when I called him back. And I've been careful not to weaponize it, but since you asked, I will respond truthfully. We spoke for 20 minutes. I stuck to facts, dates, documents, no emotion, no speculation. When I hung up, my hands were shaking. Not from fear, from relief. That night I slept for the first time in days. I dreamed of Margaret Hollander, sitting at a small table writing carefully, signing her name with intention. She looked up at me and smiled. When I woke up, I knew. Daniel had made a fatal mistake. He thought this was about power. But it was about credibility. And credibility once lost doesn't come back. The question was no longer whether he would fall. It was how much collateral damage he would cause on the way down, and whether my family would finally see what they had been protecting all along. The first crack appeared on a Tuesday morning disguised as routine. I was reviewing a guardianship petition when my assistant knocked softly and stepped inside without waiting for permission. She didn't sit down. She rarely stood like that unless something was wrong. There's a reporter on line 2, she said. Local paper, probate and courts beat. I looked up slowly. What does she want? I asked. She says she's working on a piece about professional ethics and conflicts of interest in estate law, my assistant replied. She specifically asked about the Hollander matter. There it was. Daniel had moved the fight into daylight. Put her through, I said. The reporter's voice was polite, practiced careful not to sound accusatory, while asking exactly the questions that implied wrongdoing. Ms. Bennett, she said, I'm looking into a case involving a disputed codicil and allegations of undue influence. One of the parties has suggested there may be unresolved ethical concerns. Has a finding been made? I asked calmly. No, she admitted, but the allegation exists. Then that's your story, I said, an allegation without a finding. There was a pause. Would you like to comment? Yes, I said, on the record. I have never been disciplined by the bar. I disclosed all relevant relationships. The court upheld the codicil after reviewing extensive documentation. If anyone suggests otherwise, they are misrepresenting the facts. She thanked me and hung up. I sat back in my chair. Daniel was leaking, but not strategically. Desperate leaks always leave fingerprints. That afternoon, my malpractice attorney called again. The bar is closing the preliminary review, she said. They're not moving forward. I exhaled, but she added Daniel doesn't know that yet. Good. That evening, my brother showed up at my door. He looked exhausted. Not angry, not defensive, just worn down by being pulled in two directions. I didn't know, he said as soon as I opened the door. Knew what I asked? About the bar complaint, he said. About the pressure Daniel's been putting on people. About the calls. I stepped aside and let him in. We sat at my kitchen table, the same one where I had eaten Christmas dinner alone. He's spiraling, my brother said. Emily is furious. She found emails, messages to partners. He's been framing everything as you attacking him. And I asked. And none of it lines up, he admitted. The timelines don't make sense. I nodded. They never do. He rubbed his hands together. Lauren still believes him. Of course she did. She thinks you're punishing her through him, he said quietly. I looked at him. Do you believe that? He didn't answer right away. No, he said finally. I think Daniel got caught doing something unethical, and instead of owning it, he decided to make you the villain. I didn't smile. Vindication isn't satisfying when it comes wrapped in family grief. What happens now, he asked. That depends on Daniel, I said. If he stops, it ends quietly. And if he doesn't, then the truth gets louder. 2 days later, the truth did exactly that. Daniel's firm placed him on administrative leave. No announcement, no explanation, just a quiet removal from cases and email lists. The senior partner called me that afternoon. We're conducting an internal review, he said. It would be inappropriate to discuss details, but I wanted you to know that your conduct is not under scrutiny. Thank you, I said. When I hung up, my phone buzzed. Lauren. I didn't answer. She left a voicemail. You ruined him, she said, her voice shaking. You always had to win. You couldn't just let me have this. I listened to it once, then deleted it. That night, my parents called together. Speakerphone, United Front. We need to talk, my father said. I'm listening, I replied. This has gone too far, my mother said. Daniel lost his job. Lauren's wedding is on hold. People are talking. About his actions, I said. About the family, my father corrected. About us. There it was again. Us. This didn't start with me, I said, and it won't end by silencing me. You could fix this, my mother insisted. You could speak to someone. Say it was a misunderstanding. I won't lie, I said. Not for you, not for her. Silence. You're choosing your career over your sister, my father said. No, I replied. I'm choosing truth over manipulation. They hung up without saying goodbye. The following week, the article ran. It wasn't explosive. It wasn't sensational. It was careful, measured, devastating in its restraint. It detailed a probate dispute, a contested codicil, a failed motion, an unsuccessful bar complaint, an attorney placed on leave pending review. My name appeared once, as the attorney whose documentation withstood every challenge. Daniel's name appeared 3 times, none of them flattering. Lauren called me that night. I answered this time. You did this, she said flatly. No, I replied. I let it happen. You destroyed my future, she whispered. I protected mine, I said. You don't care, she accused. I care deeply, I said, just not enough to sacrifice myself. She hung up. I stood in my living room afterward, phone still in my hand, and felt something unfamiliar. Peace. Not happiness, not triumph. Peace. Because the narrative had shifted. I was no longer defending myself against accusations. I was standing in the aftermath of truth. And truth has weight. It settles. The fallout wasn't over. Families don't heal on schedules. Damage doesn't reverse itself neatly. But Daniel's leverage was gone. His credibility fractured. And my family, for the first time, was being forced to confront a reality they had avoided for decades. That the daughter they asked to disappear had been holding everything together. And now that she had stepped away from that role, the structure was collapsing. The next chapter wouldn't be about retaliation. It would be about reckoning. And reckoning, I knew from my work, always comes due. With interest. Reckoning doesn't arrive with fireworks. It arrives with silence. The week after the article ran, my phone stopped ringing. No frantic messages, no emotional voicemails. Even my parents went quiet. It was as if everyone had collectively decided to hold their breath, waiting to see what shape the fallout would take. I welcomed the quiet. At work, things stabilized. Judges nodded a little longer when they saw me. Colleagues who had kept a polite distance before now stopped by my office to chat. Not gossip, respect. the kind that comes when people realize you didn't bend under pressure. One afternoon, the bar sent its formal notice. Complaint dismissed, no further action. I placed the letter in a drawer and didn't tell anyone. I didn't need the validation anymore. The damage had already been undone. Daniel, on the other hand, was unraveling. Through professional channels, I learned that the internal review at his firm had expanded. The Hollander estate was no longer the center of it. They were digging into other matters, expense reports, communications, a pattern of aggressive conduct that had been tolerated because he was effective and well-connected. Effectiveness buys forgiveness, until it doesn't. Emily called me late one evening. "I don't know who else to talk to," she said. Her voice was small, tired. "Are you safe?" I asked. "Yes," she said, just confused. She told me about the emails she had found, the tone Daniel used when no one important was watching, the way he talked about clients like obstacles, about women like liabilities, about my sister like an accessory. "He lies so easily," she whispered, "and he believes his own version." "That's the dangerous kind," I said gently. "I'm embarrassed," she admitted. I defended him. "I thought you were being unfair." "You were given incomplete information," I said. "That's not the same as malice." She exhaled shakily. "Lauren still doesn't see it." "I know," I said. "I don't think she wants to," Emily replied. After we hung up, I sat in the dark for a long time. I wasn't thinking about Daniel anymore. I was thinking about Lauren. My sister had built her identity around alignment, with popularity, with success, with the illusion of security. Daniel had fit that picture perfectly. Letting go of him meant letting go of the story she had been telling herself about who she was and where she was headed. That kind of loss feels like death. 2 days later, my mother showed up again. This time she looked different, smaller. She didn't comment on my apartment. She didn't criticize my tone. She sat down heavily and stared at her hands. "Your father and I are worried," she said quietly. "About Lauren," I guessed. She nodded. "She's not eating. She's barely sleeping. She says everyone is against her." I leaned back. "That's what happens when accountability arrives." My mother flinched. "You sound so harsh." "I sound honest," I replied. She looked up at me then, really looked. "You don't seem angry," she said. "I'm not," I said. "I'm done being." She swallowed. "I keep thinking about Christmas, about asking you not to come." I waited. "I didn't think it would matter this much," she whispered. "I thought you were strong enough not to be hurt." There it was. The confession without the apology. "I was strong enough," I said. "That doesn't mean it didn't hurt." She nodded slowly. "I think I failed you." I didn't rush to comfort her. I let the words hang in the space between us. "Yes," I said finally, "you did." Tears slid down her cheeks, silent, unperformed. "I don't know how to fix this," she said. "You don't fix it," I replied. "You sit with it. You let it change you." She stayed for another hour. We didn't rehash the past. We didn't resolve anything. When she left, she hugged me awkwardly like someone learning a new language. That night, Lauren called. I almost didn't answer, but I did. Her voice was flat, stripped of drama. "They put the wedding on hold," she said. "I know," I replied. "They're saying Daniel might be disbarred," she continued, "that he lied on filings, that he pressured people." I stayed quiet. "They keep asking me what I knew she said, what I ignored." "That's a hard question," I said. She laughed bitterly. "I don't know who I am without him." "That's not true," I said. "You just don't know who you are without the image." Silence. "You enjoyed this," she said suddenly. "No," I replied. "I endured it." She inhaled sharply. "You always think you're better than me." I closed my eyes. "I think I'm responsible for myself." She hung up. A week later, Daniel was formally terminated. The notice was brief, the language careful, but the message was clear. He was done. The fallout rippled outward. His name disappeared from committees. Invitations dried up. Friends distanced themselves. Influence evaporates quickly when it's built on fear. Lauren retreated. She stopped posting, stopped answering messages, stopped performing. One afternoon, she showed up at my office unannounced. She looked thinner, pale, real. We sat across from each other in silence for a long time. "I don't know how to talk to you," she said finally. "You can start by not blaming me," I replied. She nodded. "I blamed you because it was easier than blaming myself." "That's honest," I said. She looked at me with red-rimmed eyes. "I thought if I aligned myself with someone powerful, I'd be safe. And now I asked. Now I realize power without integrity is just a faster fall," she said. I studied her face. For the first time, she looked like my sister again. Not a rival, not a symbol, just human. "I don't expect forgiveness," she said. "But I don't want to be enemies." "I don't either," I replied. "But I won't go back to pretending." She nodded slowly. "I don't think I can either." When she left, I felt something loosen inside me, not healed, but no longer clenched. Reckoning had done its work. Not by destroying everyone, but by stripping away the lies. And in the quiet that followed, something new had room to breathe. The next chapter wouldn't be about punishment. It would be about what comes after you stop surviving and start choosing. The strange thing about choosing yourself after years of survival is how unfamiliar the silence feels. For weeks after Daniel's termination, nothing dramatic happened. No new scandals, no surprise emails, no emotional ambushes disguised as family dinners. Life didn't explode. It simply continued. That unsettled me more than chaos ever had. I had spent most of my adult life braced for impact, waiting for the next criticism, the next demand to be smaller, quieter, easier to explain. Now, without that constant pressure, there was space. And space has a way of forcing you to confront what you actually want, not just what you've been avoiding. At work, the Hollander matter faded into the background, as cases always do once the noise dies down. Elena's trust moved forward smoothly. Grants were issued, programs funded. Margaret Hollander's legacy quietly began doing exactly what she had intended. That mattered to me more than any headline. One afternoon, Elena stopped by with coffee. "You look different," she said, handing me a cup. "So do you," I replied. She smiled. "Lighter." "Yes," I said, "that's the word." She leaned against the doorframe. "You know, most people never get the kind of closure you just had." "I'm not sure it was closure," I said. "More like exposure." She laughed softly. "That too." After she left, I sat alone in my office and thought about something I hadn't allowed myself to think about in years. What if my life didn't have to be a reaction anymore? That question followed me home. I stopped at a grocery store I usually avoided because it took longer. I cooked a meal that required patience. I sat at my table without my laptop open. I didn't check my phone every 5 minutes. The quiet didn't feel empty. It felt earned. A few days later, my father called. Just him this time. "Can we meet?" he asked. I hesitated. Not because I was afraid, because I was no longer willing to agree out of reflex. "Why?" I asked. "I need to say something," he replied, "and I don't think I can say it over the phone." We met at a park near the river. Neutral. Public. Somewhere with benches and distance. He looked older than I remembered. Not weaker. Just unprotected. He sat down heavily and stared at the water. "I thought if we kept things calm, everything would work out," he said. "Calm for who?" I asked. He winced. "For your sister, for your mother, for the family." "And me?" I asked quietly. He didn't answer right away. "I thought you didn't need protecting," he said finally. "You were always capable, independent. So you gave all the protection to the ones who asked for it," I said. He nodded. "I see now how unfair that was." It wasn't an apology, but it was closer than I had ever heard. "I don't need you to fix the past," I said. "I need you to stop rewriting it." He looked at me then, really looked. "You're not angry anymore," he said. "No," I replied. "I'm clear." That seemed to scare him more than anger ever had. "Lauren is struggling," he said. "I know," I replied. "She's thinking about starting over," he continued. "Moving, doing something different. That's hers to decide," I said. He nodded slowly. "I wish I'd encouraged that kind of independence earlier." I stood up. "You can still encourage it now. Just don't expect me to sacrifice myself to make it easier." He didn't argue. That night I received an email from the senior partner at Daniel's firm. Brief, professional. Daniel had resigned from the bar, voluntarily effective immediately. No disbarment, no public spectacle, just an exit. I sat back and closed my eyes. That was it, the fall everyone had feared. And yet I felt nothing resembling victory, just a quiet finality. A week later, Lauren texted me. I started therapy. I stared at the message for a long time before replying. "That's a brave step." She responded almost immediately. "I don't know who I am without chasing approval." I typed deleted, then typed again. Neither did I. It takes time. She sent a heart emoji, then nothing. It wasn't reconciliation, it wasn't absolution, but it was movement. At work, I was offered a partnership track I hadn't expected so soon. My name carried weight now, not just because of the Hollander case, but because people had watched how I handled pressure. Integrity, it turns out, is noticeable when tested publicly. I accepted, not because I needed the validation, but because I wanted the platform. To choose cases, to mentor younger attorneys, to protect people who didn't have families willing to stand up for them. On a quiet Sunday afternoon, I visited Margaret Hollander's grave. I brought no flowers, just myself. "I did what you asked," I said softly, and then some. The wind moved through the trees, leaves rustled, ordinary sounds, life going on. As I walked back to my car, my phone buzzed. A message from my mother. "I'm learning how to listen. Slowly. I hope someday you'll believe that." I stared at it. Then I replied, "I'll believe it when I see it." It wasn't cruel. It was honest. That night I sat at my table and wrote a list. Not of grievances, not of goals. Of boundaries. What I would no longer accept. What I would no longer explain. What I would no longer carry for other people. Choosing yourself isn't loud. It doesn't announce itself. It's a series of quiet decisions made consistently even when no one is watching. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't waiting for permission to make them. The revenge had already happened. Not in a dramatic collapse, but in the simple fact that I was no longer living my life in response to anyone else. And that I was beginning to understand was the part no one ever recovered from. If Chapter 8 was about silence, Chapter 9 was about consequences finally finding their proper owners. The first sign came quietly the way real consequences usually do. Not with a phone call or a confrontation, but with paperwork. A certified letter arrived at my office on a gray Monday morning. No return address I recognized. Inside was a notice from a civil court in another county. Daniel Hollander had been named as a defendant in a lawsuit filed by a former client. Not the Hollander estate. Another one. The allegations were familiar. Pressure, misrepresentation, financial harm disguised as aggressive advocacy. The language was cautious but unmistakable. Someone else had decided not to stay silent. I sat back in my chair and stared at the window. The city moved on as usual. People hurried, traffic snarled, coffee cups spilled. None of them knew that a man who once walked into rooms with confidence had begun the long, humiliating descent into accountability. I didn't feel satisfaction. I felt inevitability. At lunch, a junior associate knocked on my door. She looked nervous, holding a folder too tightly. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Of course," I replied. She hesitated. "How did you not break when they came after you like that?" I thought about it. About the nights I didn't sleep. About the constant temptation to explain myself to people who had already decided who I was. I stopped arguing with people who weren't listening, I said, and I started protecting my credibility like it was my oxygen. She nodded slowly. "I want to be like that." "You already are," I said. "You just don't know it yet." That afternoon, my mother called. She didn't start with accusations this time, or concern masked as control. She started with, "I spoke to Lauren's therapist." I raised an eyebrow. "And she says we enabled her," my mother admitted quietly, "that we taught her love was conditional." I closed my eyes. "That couldn't have been easy to hear," I said. "No," she replied, "it wasn't." There was a pause. "Then I didn't realize how often we asked you to be the reasonable one, the flexible one, the one who didn't need anything." I let the silence stretch, not to punish her, to let her feel it. "I needed things," I said finally. "I just learned early not to ask you for them." Her breath caught. "I'm sorry." It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't tearful, but it was the first real apology I had ever received. "I'm listening," I said. That night, Lauren came over. No announcement, no build-up, just a text asking if I was home. She stood in my doorway, awkwardly, hands shoved into her coat pockets, like a teenager who wasn't sure she was welcome. "I won't stay long," she said. "That's okay," I replied. We sat across from each other in my living room. She looked smaller than I remembered, less curated, less certain. "I'm leaving town," she said. When I asked, "Next month," she replied. "I got a job offer in another state, not glamorous, just mine." I smiled. "That sounds like a good start." She nodded. I realized something in therapy. I spent my whole life chasing approval because I thought love had to be earned. I said nothing. "And I hated you," she continued, voice shaking, "because you didn't play that game. Even when I thought you were failing, you were free." That landed harder than any accusation ever had. "I didn't feel free," I said gently. "I just didn't perform." She wiped at her eyes. "I'm sorry I tried to erase you." I looked at her, really looked. "I forgive you," I said, "but I won't forget." She nodded. "I wouldn't expect you to." When she left, the apartment felt different, not empty, cleared. The following week, the civil suit against Daniel made local legal news. Not front page, but enough to confirm what many had already suspected. His name appeared again, this time without my shadow anywhere near it. Emily filed for divorce shortly after. She didn't call me to tell me. I heard through my brother. But a few days later, she sent a short message. "You were right. Thank you for standing your ground," I replied with a single sentence. "I hope you find peace." Daniel tried once more to reach me. A voicemail, uncharacteristically subdued. "Claire," he said, voice tight. "I know I made mistakes. I just want to talk." I deleted it. Not because I was angry, because I had nothing left to say. At work, I accepted my first mentee, a woman in her late 20s, sharp and ambitious, struggling with a family that didn't understand her choices. "I don't want to end up bitter," she said. "You won't," I replied, "as long as you don't confuse boundaries with punishment." She looked relieved. On a quiet Friday evening, I walked through my apartment and realized something had changed. I wasn't scanning for danger anymore. I wasn't rehearsing explanations. I wasn't bracing for the next demand to shrink. Revenge had never been my goal. Justice had. And justice doesn't scream. It documents, it waits, it allows people to reveal themselves fully, then steps aside. The people who tried to erase me hadn't been destroyed by my hand. They had simply been left alone with who they truly were. That I was learning is the most devastating mirror of all. As I turned off the lights and went to bed, my phone buzzed once more. A message from Lauren. "I don't know what the future looks like, but I know I don't want to live in lies anymore." I typed back. "Neither do I." And for the first time since this all began, I knew exactly what came next. Not another fight, not another reckoning, but a life that no longer required one. The final chapters wouldn't be about what was taken from me. They would be about what I chose to build in its place. The strange thing about rebuilding is that it rarely announces itself as a new beginning. It feels more like rearranging furniture, after a storm moving things back into place, deciding what no longer belongs in the room. Spring arrived quietly that year. Not the cinematic kind with sudden warmth and blossoming trees, but a slow thaw. Snowbanks shrinking into gray piles, mornings that smelled less like metal and more like damp earth. I took a week off work for the first time in years. Not a staycation filled with emails and just checking in. A real break. I turned on my out-of-office reply. I handed my cases to colleagues I trusted. I closed my laptop and left it closed. On the first morning of that week, I woke up disoriented. My body was used to urgency. Without it, I didn't know what to do with my hands. So I walked. I walked through neighborhoods I usually only drove past. I noticed gardens just beginning to push through the soil. I noticed older women sitting on porches with mugs of coffee watching the world without needing to participate in it. That image stayed with me. At a small bookstore near the river, I ran into someone I hadn't seen in years. Margaret Collins. She had been one of my earliest clients. A widow in her late 60s whose children had tried to force her into assisted living so they could sell her house. I had helped her retain autonomy, draft a trust, and tell her family no. She smiled when she saw me, warm, unafraid. "Claire Bennett," she said, "still fighting the good fights." "Trying to," I replied. She studied my face. "You look different." "I feel different," I said. She nodded knowingly. That happens when you stop apologizing for existing. We sat together for a while talking about nothing important. Books, weather, her new neighbor who borrowed sugar and never returned it. As I left, she touched my arm. "You did right by people," she said. "That always comes back around." I carried that with me. When I returned to work, the pace resumed, but it no longer consumed me. I delegated more. I trusted my team. I stopped volunteering to absorb everyone else's crisis. One afternoon, my managing partner called me into her office. "I want you to consider something," she said, sliding a file across her desk. "We're starting a small initiative, pro bono estate planning for women over 50, divorced, widowed, estranged, people who don't have family advocating for them." I felt my chest tighten. "I'd like you to lead it," she continued. "You have the temperament and the credibility." I didn't hesitate, yes. That work grounded me in a way I hadn't expected. Sitting across from women who had been dismissed, minimized, or exploited by their own families reminded me why I chose this field in the first place. Not to win, to witness. At home, things were changing too. My mother called once a week now, not to instruct, to ask. "How are you?" she would say, uncertain, as if trying on a new language. I answered honestly, sometimes briefly, sometimes not at all. Lauren moved away as planned. She sent me photos of her new apartment. Bare walls, secondhand furniture, a cat she adopted impulsively. "It's quiet here," she texted once, "but I think I need that." I replied, "Quiet can be kind." She didn't respond immediately. When she did, it was just thank you. Daniel's name continued to surface occasionally in legal circles. Not dramatically, just as someone people spoke about with caution. "Be careful with him. He's complicated. I heard he's trying to start over somewhere else." It no longer mattered to me. The final tie severed itself one afternoon when I received a forwarded email from my malpractice attorney. The civil suit against Daniel had settled, not in his favor. There was no apology, no acknowledgement of wrongdoing, just a check and a confidentiality clause. I stared at the email longer than necessary. That was it. No courtroom moment, no confession, just the quiet end of a chapter. That evening, I invited my brother and Emily over for dinner. Something simple. Pasta, bread, wine. We talked about their children, about work, about how strange it felt to be in our 30s and 40s without a script. At one point, my brother looked at me and said, "I should have stood up for you sooner." I met his gaze. "You stood up when it counted." He nodded, relieved. After they left, I cleaned up slowly, not rushing, not distracted. I realized then that my life no longer revolved around reacting to harm. It revolved around intention. I had stopped asking myself how to survive my family. I had started asking myself how to honor my own values. The answer wasn't dramatic. It was steady. Boundaries, work that mattered, relationships chosen deliberately. I didn't need revenge anymore. The people who tried to erase me had already been forced to confront themselves. And I had learned something critical in the process. You don't rebuild your life by proving others wrong. You rebuild it by finally believing yourself. As I turned out the lights and went to bed that night, I thought about the women I'd met through my work. The ones who had lived entire decades without anyone asking what they wanted. I smiled softly in the dark. Because I knew the next chapter of my life wouldn't be about correcting the past. It would be about designing the future, on my terms, and that more than anything else felt like freedom. Justice, I learned, doesn't always arrive with sirens or verdicts. Sometimes it shows up quietly weeks later disguised as consequences you didn't have to engineer yourself. The call came on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon. I was in my office door, half open, reviewing a draft will for a woman named Ruth, who insisted on leaving her house to her church instead of her children. Not because she loved the church more, but because her children had stopped calling her once the mortgage was paid off. My phone buzzed. Unknown number. Normally I let those go to voicemail. That day I didn't. Claire Bennett, I answered. There was a pause, breathing, shallow, nervous. Claire, it's Mom. I closed the file in front of me but didn't speak. I know you're busy, she rushed on. I wanted to tell you something before you heard it from someone else. My grip tightened around the phone. Your father had a stroke last night. The words didn't land the way I expected. No rush of panic, no immediate guilt. Just information registering itself like a line item on a ledger. How bad, I asked. He's stable, she said quickly. It was mild, they think. But it shook him, shook both of us. I waited. The silence stretched until she filled it. He keeps asking for you. There it was. The familiar tug, the expectation that I would rearrange my life because someone else was afraid. I'm sorry that happened, I said carefully. Is he receiving good care? Yes, the hospital here is fine. Then I'm glad to hear he's stable. Another pause. You're not coming, she said, not accusing, realizing. No, I said, I'm not. Her breath caught. I didn't say that to make you feel guilty, she said quickly. I just thought you should know. I appreciate the information, I replied. But my decision hasn't changed. What decision, she asked, her voice small. To step back, I said. From the dynamic, from the expectation that I will always be the one to absorb discomfort. There was a quiet sniff. I couldn't tell if she was crying or just tired. You've changed, she said. Yes, I agreed. I have. After we hung up, I sat very still. Not because I was suppressing emotion, because I was noticing its absence. Later that week, I heard from a cousin I barely spoke to anymore. She called under the guise of checking in. What she really wanted was information. Your mom said things are strange, she said delicately. That's accurate, I replied. She's been telling people you've gone cold. I smiled faintly. People often call boundaries cold when they benefit from your warmth. The line went quiet. I just thought you should know how it looks, my cousin said. I'm comfortable with how it looks, I answered. And I was. At work, the pro bono initiative expanded faster than expected. Word traveled quickly among women who had been dismissed, sidelined, or quietly erased by families who assumed compliance. One afternoon, a woman named Helen sat across from me, late 50s, hands folded tightly in her lap. My son stopped speaking to me after I changed my will, she said. He said I was punishing him. Were you? I asked. She shook her head. I was protecting myself. I nodded. Those two things are often confused. When she left, she hugged me, harder than expected. You make it easier to breathe, she said. That night, I thought about how often women were taught that self-protection was cruelty, that choosing themselves was betrayal. The irony was sharp. A month later, the news arrived without ceremony. Daniel had been quietly dismissed from his firm. No announcement, no scandal headline. Just a LinkedIn update that said he was exploring new opportunities. The partner who told me lowered his voice like he was sharing gossip. He burned too many bridges, he said. People started comparing notes. I nodded. Patterns once seen are hard to unsee. Lauren called that evening. I heard about Dad, she said. Yes, I replied. She hesitated. Are you okay? I am, I said truthfully. Are you? She sighed. I don't know. I feel angry and sad and relieved all at once. That sounds about right, I said. There was a pause. I'm starting therapy, she said quietly. I want to understand why I always thought keeping the peace was my responsibility. Something loosened in my chest. I'm proud of you, I said. Me too, she replied, surprised. As summer approached, my parents sent a letter. An actual letter, handwritten. It didn't apologize. Not really. But it acknowledged things they'd never acknowledged before. That they relied on me to be strong so they didn't have to be accountable. That they confused my competence with emotional self-sufficiency. That they didn't know how to repair what they'd damaged. I read it twice. Then I placed it in a drawer. I didn't respond. Not because I was punishing them, But because not everything requires closure to move forward, some things simply need distance. On the anniversary of the day everything fell apart, I took myself to dinner. Same restaurant Daniel had once insisted was too expensive. I ordered what I wanted, ate slowly, watched couples and groups and solitary diners like myself. No one stared. No one cared. And that was the point. When the check came, I paid without flinching. Walking home, the city hummed around me, alive, indifferent. I realized then that my life was no longer organized around proving my worth to people who refused to see it. It was organized around alignment between what I believed and how I lived. I slept deeply that night, unburdened, and for the first time truly at peace with the idea that justice doesn't always look like triumph. Sometimes it looks like clarity, and sometimes that is enough. The morning I realized the story was over, nothing dramatic happened. No phone call, no confrontation, no sudden epiphany. I was standing in my kitchen, barefoot, waiting for the coffee to finish brewing, when the thought arrived fully formed and unmistakably calm. This no longer defines me. It startled me how certain it felt. For so long, my life had been shaped by reaction, by bracing, by preparing for the next disappointment or the next demand disguised as love. Even after the conflict ended, even after the legal dust settled, part of me had still been oriented toward the past, as if waiting for it to reach out and grab me again. But that morning it didn't. The silence felt earned. I took my coffee to the window and watched the city wake up. Cars moved, people hurried. Somewhere arguments were starting. Somewhere else someone was being excluded from a family event they didn't deserve to be cut out of. I knew because I had lived that moment. And I also knew this: it doesn't last forever unless you let it. Later that day, I received an email from a woman named Janice. She had found my name through the pro bono program. She was 61, divorced, estranged from 2 adult sons who believed her house was already theirs. Her message was short. "I don't want revenge," she wrote. "I just want peace. And I don't know how to get it without being labeled selfish." I stared at the screen for a long time. Then I replied, "You're not selfish, you're awake, let's talk." That afternoon, as I walked into the conference room to meet her, I caught my reflection in the glass. I looked older than I did a year ago. Not physically, internally. Older in the way that comes from having your illusions stripped away and deciding not to replace them with new ones. I liked that version of myself, Janice cried during our meeting. Not loudly, not dramatically, just the quiet, exhausted tears of someone who had spent decades shrinking herself to avoid conflict. "I raised them," she said. "I did everything right." "I know," I told her, because I did know. When she left, she hugged me the way women do when they realize they are not alone anymore. That night I went home and cooked dinner for myself. Nothing elaborate, just something warm. As I ate, I thought about my parents. They hadn't called in weeks. For the first time in my life, that didn't feel like abandonment. It felt like relief. I thought about my sister. I hadn't heard her voice since the night she tried to burn everything down in public. Through mutual acquaintances, I knew she was laying low. That was the phrase people used when they didn't want to say consequences. I didn't wish her harm, but I no longer wished her rescue. That distinction mattered. I thought about Daniel, how his downfall had not required my continued attention, how his reputation had collapsed not because I destroyed it, but because it couldn't survive daylight. I had spent years believing that justice required confrontation. I was wrong. Justice requires truth, and truth when left alone does its work. A few weeks later, my mother left a voicemail. Her voice sounded older than I remembered. "We're trying to understand," she said. "We're reading, we're talking. I don't know if we'll ever get it right." She paused. "But I see now that we asked you to be smaller so we wouldn't have to look at ourselves." I didn't call back right away. When I eventually did, weeks later, the conversation was different. Shorter, honest, without expectation. That was the boundary I kept. Not distance out of punishment. Distance out of self-respect. On my birthday that year, I didn't celebrate with family. I didn't make excuses. I booked a quiet weekend away by myself. I walked along the water. I ate when I was hungry. I slept when I was tired. I didn't wait for anyone's permission to enjoy my life. That night, sitting alone on a balcony overlooking dark water, I understood something that had taken me decades to learn. Being excluded taught me what inclusion actually means. It means choosing yourself. It means refusing to trade your dignity for belonging. It means recognizing that some people will only love you if you are useful, and deciding that kind of love is too expensive. The next morning, as I packed to leave, I wrote one sentence in my journal. I am no longer available for roles that require my erasure. I closed the book. I didn't need to write the rest, because this chapter wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about restoration, and restoration doesn't ask for applause. It asks for consistency. I went back to my life, to my work, To the women who needed someone to sit across from them and say, "You're not wrong for wanting more." And slowly, steadily, my life became something that no one could take from me. Not through lies, not through exclusion, not through betrayal. If you're listening to this and something in it feels uncomfortably familiar, let me say this clearly. You are not too much. You are not selfish. You are not wrong for noticing the pattern. Sometimes the most powerful revenge isn't destroying the people who hurt you. It's building a life they no longer have access to. If this story resonated with you, I'd love to hear where you're listening from today. Please leave a comment, share your thoughts, and if you want more stories like this, subscribe to the channel. You're not alone, and your story isn't over yet.